Okay, now we go into part three of the ancient Egyptians race controversy. If you're meeting this in the middle and haven't seen part one or two, part one will be in your top right hand corner at the end of this. So you can go right to the very end of this and hit on the top right hand corner. It'll be part one and start through it. And if we go to a part four, it'll be in your top left hand corner. If it dies in the middle of my conversation, I'll just overlap as I've done before and we will continue. And I'm going to overlap slightly here too. In 1939, Champion states in his work Egypt Ancients that the Egyptians and Nubians are represented in the same manner in tomb paintings and reliefs, which is totally untrue. Once you go and look at them, the Nubian has a totally different phenotype and coloration than the Egyptians. And at first, and all the way until after the Middle Kingdom, they really only had about 6 colors going on, and only expanded it to 9 or 10. Their box of crayons was not fantastic, but it's also a symbolic type coloration where a man is drawn in red ochre and a female is drawn pale. This is seen in all the ancient Greek art, Minoans, and all these other people that we definitely know are pale. But in some respects, somehow we want to pretend that even though the females are drawn just as pale as anybody, and most of the priests too, that the men must have been dark somehow. And it's not really factually truth, especially once we start looking at the genetics of these people and what had gone on. Now, University of Chicago scholars assert that Nubians are generally depicted with black paint, but that the skin pigment used in Egyptian paintings to refer to Nubians can also range, in rare occasions, to dark red to brown to black, and this can be observed in paintings from the tomb of the Egyptian Hoi, as well as Ramses II temple at Biat al-Wali. And this is where we were before. And yeah, we had a guy that's really a troll on my site here, very mad that he's not in the Bible or an Egyptian and is a West African, and wants to try to use that as some type of wedge in that there's actually a couple of paintings out of all of them where negroids are drawn different colors. They say, well, whenever they overlap, quite often they'll actually show the Egyptians being in a lighter, darker type form, and in the big cluster of all the black people that are getting run over by the chariots of King Tut, which is the picture that he tries to talk about, that they are drawn also in the same way, and it's shown also in Ramses' tomb here too, and whenever they're in their procession. And what's the deal with that? Well, it's entirely possible that they realized that there were some nilotics which are just extremely dark, and then maybe there were some that weren't quite so dark, and they all came in a procession together. But one thing's for sure, when you look at them, they have a Negroid phenotype, and we're not going to say, oh, see these Nubian Negroid people, they were the Caucasian-looking Egyptians over here. That would be silly to try to pull off, but it's being tried quite a bit. Let's continue. Also, Snowden indicates that Romans have accurate knowledge of the Negroes of a red copper colored complexion from among African tribes. And yeah, they knew about it. They ran all the way up in, and you ran into people like Ethiopians of today that aren't, real extreme dark, and Khoisan that aren't as dark, and things like that. People are aware of it, but the Nilotic Nubians were extremely dark right there next to them. Let's continue. Conversely, Neovitz states Egyptian art depicted Egyptians on one hand and Nubians and other blacks on the other hand, with distinctly different ethnic characteristics, and depicted this abundantly and often aggressively. And I agree, it shows a bulbous forehead, prognathic jaw, negroid nose, larger lips sticking out, almost an exaggerated state. But then again, these people were also doing this exaggerated state of everybody kind of looks like this one look that they would do. Even you see it all the statues, but the rare few occurrences we see where they didn't do so, not Akhenaten, that's kind of a weird horse face crap. But the other forms of them, and especially some of the earlier tombs and some of the scribes, you can actually almost see the person inside of it. Whereas when you look at the Greek forms, everybody looks like an Adonis, but then their face has definite difference to each one, and you can see how they were modeled after a person in certain ways or an aspect, whereas the Egyptians almost look the same. Even when a woman is a pharaoh, bam, she looks pretty much the same. There's really hardly any variation going on in there. Everybody's the same one look. But that isn't actuality a truth either. And then also in the Egyptians, everybody's drawn as being rather skinny, and we realize now that that wasn't going on so much anymore either. Just like when you look at the ancient Romans and Greeks and stuff, and Nero was known to have been heavy, but a lot of the other ones are all just boom, they're all perfect all the way through. I don't think that's the way it went in any way, shape, or form either, but they're drawn that way in an idealistic form. You know, whenever you draw Elvis, you don't draw Elvis during his fat couple of years right there. You draw Elvis anything but, and if you draw him in those fat couple of years, you take a few pounds off. That's the way that it is right there. But what if you tried to make everybody look like Elvis, even if they didn't look like Elvis? That's kind of what the Egyptians did. Let's continue. The Egyptians accurately, arrogantly, and aggressively made a national and ethnic distinction from very early date in their art and literature. He continues, there is an extraordinary abundance of Egyptian works of art which clearly depicted sharply contrasted reddish-brown Egyptians and black Nubians, and with that phenotype too. So, however, Manu Aprim, a professor at Merritt College, specialized in African and African American history and culture, oh boy, claims that the book Modern Fraud, the forged ancient Egyptian statues of Rahotep and Nofret, that many ancient Egyptian statues and artworks are modern frauds that have been created specifically to hide the fact that the ancient Egyptians were black. You see, it's a conspiracy. While authentic artworks that demonstrate black characteristics are systematically defaced or even modified, although you can't find any of these statues or these wall things that are modified where somebody's given a bigger nose or anything along those lines. They wish to think, see, here it is. When they get debunked totally, they go, well, somebody changed it then. I'll leave that pause there for a second because that's rather disgusting too. To think that the whole world is just trying to pull one over on West African primitives. Really. And it isn't West African primitives trying to pull one over on the whole world. Really? Yeah, okay. Let's continue. Abram repeatedly makes this accusation that the Egyptian authorities are systematically destroying evidence that proves the Egyptians were black under the guise of renovating and conserving the biblical temples and structure. He further accuses European scholars of wittingly participating in and embedding in this process. And if I'm not mistaken, I've seen a video piece where they've taken old art. Now, these are actually the people from the Greek time, whenever they had the wood facings onto them, and they're taking this light solvent and on Q-tips, and they're rubbing it down and spinning the Q-tip as they do it. And they do it over and over again, working through it, and then they do a few of them that are just water, right? And then they dry them off or whatever, and it actually takes off the tarnish of time to all these people. But the one that they try to show is actually from way late in a period, and you know it's a Ptolemaic type dynasty and stuff, and it's kind of foolish to even, it's like, yeah, but all these people are Caucasian anyhow, even if you did try. And we're talking about ancient Egyptians here, which had a lot of red and blonde hair and all these things that, yeah, okay, so let's continue. Abram has a specific concern about the painting of the Table of Nations in the tomb of Ramses III, or KV11. And I've shown a video that has a clip in that, but I'm about to show you a walkthrough of that exact thing. The Table of Nations is a standard painting that appears in a number of tombs, and they were usually provided for the guidance of the soul in the afterlife of the deceased. And whenever they say Table of Nations or whatever, that means the people that are right around him there. Whenever it says all the people of the world, no. Just like the Bible, it doesn't talk about Eskimos or Amerindians or perhaps Orientals like Japanese or Chinese people. It doesn't talk about Negroids in any way. It only talks about the Caucasians of the Bible, and these people only talk about the people that are in direct confluence with them at this point. They just really simply refer to them as Asiatics, right? And then people that are right there on the Mediterranean, and the Negroids that are way up the Nile the other way, and not anywhere else, and themselves, in these pictures, and they already knew then of a few more people, like Phoenicians and so on, that go into that, Libyans and X. But let's just continue here. The Table of Nations is a standard painting that appears in a number of tombs, and they were usually provided for the guidance of the soul of the deceased. Among other things, it's described as the 4 races of men, which is incredibly weird because it leaves out any Amerindian contact people or any of the others that I just spoke of. It just kind of leaves it alone, but people want to say this is something like the Bible and everybody came out of that boat, so where's the Negro? And it doesn't work that way at all. Translation by E.A. Wallace Budge. The first are Reth, the second are called Amu, the second are called Nehesu, and the fourth are called Temehu. The Reth are the Egyptians, the Amu are dwellers in the deserts east and northeast of Egypt, the Nahasu are the black races, and the Temehu are the fair-skinned Libyans. And so the only Negroid that's described here in any way, shape, or form is this one. And if you look, the prognostic jaw, the bulbous forehead, and the mouth, and how here we have an Egyptian, always drawn in symbolic red ochre, and then these people, by the Egyptians, not drawn that way, but in their own art, drawn that way. Yeah, and you can see all the tattoos all over these people and stuff, and reddish beards. Yep, and the side lock that's quotated with them, and the 2 plumes in the hair. And so this looks like it's some type of, this would be the well-to-do or the kings from those lands they're trying to portray at this point. And again, so this is Reth, the Egyptians, and then Retenu, the people that are right around there, but we'll call it Amu, Asiatics. Then we have Nehesu, the Nubians. Ironically, Nehesu, I believe nowadays in Coptic means worthless. Then we have Temehu. And what are Temehu? They're the Libyans that all ran part of North Africa. And then again, all of North Africa was called Libya. The whole continent itself was called Libya until they changed it to Africa, named it after another Caucasian. It was called Libya, and these are the people of the Libya part. That Egypt himself was just saying, we're on down up and down this river near this black soil. They're all the whole other place. And if you look at Herodotus' old maps, they didn't know it existed. No prognathism in this man whatsoever. Exactly the same guy, just drawn a slightly different color. Is that the way that goes on here? No, not at all. You can tell the difference, and the earring also shows you something. So, and the DNA, as we looked at before, shows up to going up through Europe and all up through these people that are Caucasians and not Negroids at all. And that just really puts a nail in the coffin quite hard. But let me go back down here. Cleopatra. Man, there was a long one on Cleopatra, and I just didn't want to go through it all. If you want to, you can look at it, but it's not much. So this is called the Lepsis drawing, and 7 Phoenician 7 did a recent debunk on it because it was shown by Akala in his video where he tried to come up with some BS and put it all together and just run over people with something they didn't know about. People try to say in the comments that it looked like he was talking to somebody like scholars, and if you ever look, it's not scholars anyway. There's only like 35 people there, it looks like, at the most. But regardless of that fact, he actually misnames the actual picture where it comes from, the pharaoh, as opposed to Ramses III and Ramses II. And it just works its way from there, and she works her magic on him, just showing you what these words mean next to them in their cartouches, and that no, it doesn't mean that in any way, shape, or form. It's a different picture than this, where it shows 2 Negro types that are shown in the same dress, but nowhere near that dress with the sash. Something totally different. And so that also doesn't equate correctly either. But the archaeologist Richard Lepsius documented many ancient Egyptian tomb paintings in his work Dankmeyer Egyptian and Ethiopian. In 1913, after the death of Lepsius, an updated reprint of the work was produced, edited by Kurt Seith. This printing included an additional section called the Erzganzband in German, which incorporated many illustrations that did not appear in Lepsius' original work. One of them, Plate 48, illustrated one example of the four nations as depicted in KV11, but slightly different, and shows the Egyptian nation and the Nubian nation as identical to each other in skin color and dress. Professor Ampem has declared that Plate 48 is a true reflection of the original painting and that it proves that the ancient Egyptians were identical in appearance to the Nubians, even though he admits no other examples of the Table of Nations show this similarity. He has further accused Euro-American writers of attempting to mislead the public on this issue. And yet, this is the one I'm talking about, where if you look at it, none of those say that they're Egyptians in any way, shape, or form to the cartouches that are next to them. And of course, you can tell at a glance they are Negroids and Nubians, and not drawn like the Egyptians and the other 44,000 pieces of art that show that they're non-Negroid phenotype. So it's kind of pathetic, and then of course he accuses Euro-American writers of attempting to mislead, and I think we can see who's definitely trying to mislead somebody. And then whenever you find out they're West African people who didn't even know Egypt existed, it becomes fairly disgusting, and by fairly I mean a lot. The late Egyptologist Frank Yurko visited the tombs of Ramses III in KV11, and in 1996 article on the Ramses III tomb reflects, he pointed out that the depiction of Plate 48 in the Urzgaban selection is not a correct depiction of what is actually painted on the walls of the tomb even. Yurko notes that instead that Plate 48 is a pastiche of samples of what is on the tomb walls. So it was just selected here, 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 and blacks tried to use that and write Egyptian and Negro up under it. And black people went for it quite easily and disgustingly. Yurko points also to the much more recent photographs of Dr. Eric Horning as a correct depiction of the actual paintings. Dr. Horning, The Valley of the Kings, Horizon of Eternity, that came out in 1990. Apim nonetheless continues to claim that the Plate 48 shows accurately the images that stand on the walls of KV11, and he categorically accuses them of Yurko and Hungering of perpetuating a deliberate deception for the purposes of misleading the public about the true race of the ancient Negro West African primitive Egyptians. And in reality, there is no such thing as a Negro Egyptian. In all honesty, if we were to be quite honest. So let's see their hypothesis. And again, if this cuts, we're just going to the next part, which will be in your top left-hand corner. The Black Egyptian hypothesis is held by various authors. He cites a bunch of them here, that ancient Egypt was indigenous to Africa and therefore a black civilization. This includes a particular focus to links on sub-Saharan cultures and the questioning of the race of the specific notable individuals from dynastic times, including Tutankhamun, Lord, and the king represented in the Great Sphinx of Giza, and Greek Ptolemaic Queen Cleopatra. Since the second half of the 20th century, typological and hierarchical models of race have increasingly been rejected by scientists, and most scholars have held that applying modern notions of race to ancient Egypt is anachronistic and just trying to let it go because black people go crazy whenever they figure out that they West Africans weren't East African Caucasians. And why would they? And when they find out they're not a part of the Bible in any way, shape, or form either, why would they? It wasn't their book. India people don't freak out over it. Oriental people don't freak out over it. Everybody had their own thing going on. It's just their voodoo type thing they don't want to go back to. They realize that's just shamanistic witch doctor primitive crap. So now they're going to say, we were in your Bible. Somehow. Now, this particular focus they have on sub-Saharan cultures, the questioning that this man talks about is how you could possibly relate the two of them, for there's no connection between the two. In fact, the ancient Herodotus map shows you that they don't even know it exists, and there is no interaction that they can show in any way, shape, or form. Early advocates of the black African model relied heavily on writings from classical Greek historians including Strabo, Diodorus Siculus, and Herodotus, wherein the Greeks referred to Egyptians as melanachros with woolly hair in some translations, but melanocroes just actually means somebody that's a little bit darker than what they are, and they're running around pale as hell, as if you looked. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that. And woolly hair can be transposed as being flaxen or being like combed out wool, like the Sumerians used to wear the wool pantaloons and things that they had on them. And so none of this could be construed as Negroid nap or Bantu knots in any way, shape, or form, even if you went that way with it. The translation of the Greek word melanocros is disputed, being translated as either black or dark-skinned or tanned or darker than white, which I'm extremely darker than white, like the wall there in the words. And of course, white people, even being an albino, aren't white. They're shades of tan going through brown, making it extremely dark. But regardless of that fact, Snowden, dun dun dun, claims that Diop is distorting his classical sources and quoting them selectively, and he damn well was, and people have just picked them apart totally, and it really has no basis left, and no one should actually refer to that. It's almost gotten to be a joke, but let's continue. There's a dispute about the historical accuracy of the works on Herodotus, of course. Some scholars support the reliability of Herodotus, and he gives a few examples there, but I can give you a bunch of them. He went off hearsay off everybody he talked to, and no matter what they say, he wrote it down, so it wasn't actually trying to be accurate. It was pretty much on what they had said about each other. It says there are gold mining giant ants in India, and they can chase down and kill things and stuff. And some of the other guys elaborated on this idea before they had ever been there in any way, shape, or form. Then again, was this a creative ploy trying to get people to not go to India and try to travel or do merchant work with them like the Phoenicians did, always showing out in the ocean these dragons and these beasts be there? While other scholars regard his works as being unreliable as historical sources, particularly those relating to Egypt. And then there's a bunch of sources after that, because why? Well, it's well known now that, well, he says this, but here it is. And he says this, and here it is. And the people he was talking to weren't even Egyptians, and there it is, and da-da-da. And it just goes from there. So really, it's a moot point to try to use Herodotus, but Herodotus says other things about chasing vile Negroid troglodytes on chariots, but they want to tell you that that's a no-no. The yes is that black people are something and they came from the south. Well, if I'm in Sais right there at the Delta and they say they came from the south can be Cairo. Oh, well, no, and we've been through the Temple of the Moon and the whole 9 yards, people. There is no connection whatsoever. It's gotten past the point of being debunked where there's nothing left to stand on. Other points used to support the black hypothesis include testing melanin levels in a small sample of mummies, and this was something blacks touted a whole bunch. But then again, Bob Breyer took a very pale Caucasian guy and ran him through the process of natron and everything, and he ended up dark as mahogany beef jerky. I've got a couple of videos on it, but you can just look it up. Mr. Mummy, Bob Breyer, and he will make a mummy. And it'll show you the person he uses, going through the process, wrapping him up. And as he's wrapping him up, you can see that skin. They keep his face away from the camera, but it's a medical cadaver. And, the melanin levels go way up whenever that happens. There's this process that happens to people. It's well documented. And that doesn't make them a Negro. Oh, and by the way, after that, then they shellac them with the stuff like black lacquer. Yeah, so really, and then you go, they're Negroes. Most of them have thin lips and so on, but what they try to omit when they're looking at that is that, look, she has auburn hair. Look, he has red hair. Look, it's non-Negroid hair no matter what. Oh, it's black hair. That's non-Negroid hair. Let's look at it under a microscope. Oh, and then they want to get mad again and call you a Neanderthal or something. And, who was just acting duh? Yeah, you were trying to pull off a doy is what you were trying to pull off. Let's continue. Arguing that the ancient Egyptian language was related to Diop's native Wolof in Senegal, interpretations of the original name Kemet, conventionally pronounced Kemet, used the ancient Egyptians to describe themselves and their land depending on points of view. And then linguistics, that people that really know got a hold of this and said Senegalese and Wolof have no connection whatsoever, but perhaps a distant one from other people, and it's not even a related linguistic group. And neither are your Senegalese. But that didn't stop black people right after that came out of going, we was. Biblical traditions and interpretations of the depictions of the Egyptians in numerous paintings and statues. Other points hypothesis include cultural affiliations such as circumcision, the matriarchy, totemism, hair braiding, head binding, and kingship cults, and so on. That just all leads to Caucasian concepts. Artifacts found at Questel near Abu Simbel, modern Sudan, were shown that ancient Egypt and a group of Nubians shared the same culture and were part of the greater Nile Valley substratum. And it's like, no, the Nubians took upon the Egyptian culture, and it's well documented, but they weren't Egyptians all of a sudden. It's not the way that works. I can learn to speak Japanese great, and I'm never going to be a Japanese person. I could have 3 generations of Caucasians in Japan and still not be a Japanese person. Let's continue. And biblical traditions can just be thrown out, people. That has nothing to do with it. Those were 3 Caucasians coming out of both. There wasn't some magic Negro or a cursed Negro, and all Negroes are cursed from there. If it was just this one man, not Ham, but Canaan. So Hamites can't even fit their concept, but they try hard. But if Canaan was cursed, then Canaan would be marrying some Caucasian in the world because he's the only Negro cursed. So again, we have no way of possibly making a solid Negro people. And of course, Negroids don't have any Neanderthal admix or a lot of things, and they have their own admix, which is different, and their own ghost species too, which is part of what makes them extremely different. And what makes the slight variation of difference between Asians and Caucasians, which are closely related. And then also the Denisovans and the ancient India people, who really are Caucasians with a Denisovan blend, different than the other islanders somewhat, and none of those are Negroids either. Let's continue. At UNESCO Symposium, The Peopling of Ancient Egypt and the Deciphering of Meroitic Script in Cairo in 1974, the Black Hypothesis met with profound disagreement. No wonder. Most participants concluded that the ancient Egyptian population was indigenous to the Nile Valley and was made up of people from north and south of the Sahara who were differentiated by their color. The current position of modern scholarship is that the Egyptian civilization was an indigenous Nile Valley development. And you can see the population and history of Egypt, and yeah, I'm going to damn well do one on that. But, in fact, there were Caucasians. If you look up Caucasian race, it will actually show you that Caucasians were all of North Africa, in Egypt, and through the Horn of Africa. But Asiatic race theory, well, there is no Asiatic race. The Asiatic race is Caucasians. All of that, Asia Minor. When we talk about Asians today, it's really talking about Japanese and Chinese people. So it depends on which way you look at it. Let's go into this here real quick. Where are we at here? 28. Let's continue. The Asiatic race theory holds that the ancient Egyptians were the lineal descendants of the biblical Ham, or Hamites, through his son Mizraim, which has a name that goes with an ancient name for Egypt. And so this works together with that Caucasians in Egypt situation. This theory was most dominant view of the early Middle Ages. All the way up to the early 19th century, the descendants of Ham were traditionally considered to be the darkest skinned branch of humanity, either because of their geographic allotment to Africa, because of the curse of Ham. Thus, Diop cites Gaston Maspero. Moreover, the Bible states that Mizraim, son of Ham, brother of Cush and of Canaan, came from Mesopotamia to settle with his children on the banks of the Nile. And yeah, Diop, you hit that right. It was Caucasians. And you look at all the ancient people from Sumeria and Mesopotamia, and they have all these blue-eyed statues, and they're all Caucasians. And yeah, all that went over. The only thing that you're missing here is that none of them are Negroids in any way, shape, or form. God never mentions cursing it to turn black or anything. And again, who would he marry? We're done. By the 20th century, the Asiatic race theory and its variation offshoots were abandoned, but were superseded by two related theories: the Eurocentric Hamitic hypothesis, asserting that Caucasian racial group moved into North and East Africa from early prehistoric, subsequently bringing with them all advanced agriculture, technology, and civilization, and the dynastic race theory. By the way, part one seems pretty damn accurate. Dynastic race theory, proposing that Mesopotamian invaders were responsible for the dynastic civilization of Egypt at 3000 BC, in sharp contrast to the Asiatic race theory. Neither of these theories proposes that Caucasians were indigenous inhabitants of Egypt, and that's strange because they actually all contain that idea. The original inhabitants of all of North Africa, Green Sahara, and Egypt, and through the Horn were all Caucasians in elder times, and then there was an influx of these two groups that he's talking about, bringing all the grains, all the plants, all the emmer grains that we still use today with wheat and barley and situations like that, that had already been genetically helped out by these ancient Anatolian and Sumerian farmers, the original people who have started civilization and farming in the world. And Egypt changed at that moment. It put two and two together and became a much bigger number, and then coincided with Upper and Lower Egypt going together. But both of those were Caucasian type people, and no, one of them wasn't a admixed people somehow at that time or anything going on. Find no records of that. That's only the wishes of people that are admixed now and want that to be the truth back then. In sharp contrast to the Asiatic race theory, neither of these theories propose that the Caucasians were indigenous inhabitants to Egypt, yet the Caucasian Hamitic hypothesis. In 1844, George Morton wrote that the Nile Valley was originally peopled by a branch of the Caucasian race, and it's what's in the definition now, pardon me, and acknowledged that the Negroes were present in ancient Egypt, but claimed that they were either captives or servants, as shown, where they're either using a fan on somebody, and it says that they were eunuchs. And the only Negro we've ever found in a mummified form in any of the graveyards was King Tut's Menkaure, and they try to say he was an official, he was this, he was that, but in other statements it says that he was just the castrated eunuch fan bearer for King Tut and would just fan him, and so he wanted someone to fan him in the afterlife. And they put him with him. He acknowledged that Negroes were present in Egypt, but they were captives and servants. George Glidden wrote that the Egyptians were white men of no darker hue than pure Arab or Jew or a Phoenician. And that is the case. Because they draw themselves on the wall as being a darker skinned people, the Greeks did so themselves. So did the Minoans, Mitannian things, and the women as being pale. You have to realize that if the women can get that pale, the men can too. What are they showing? They're out doing things. They're in action. It's been something found in symbolism all the way back to Cro-Magnon times and red ochre burials and things that go along with it. And it all has to do with the rebirth, and it has to do with early proto-religions, if you will. The similar Hamitic hypothesis, which developed directly from Asiatic race theory, argued that the Ethiopian and Arab populations of the Horn of Africa were the inventions of agriculture and had brought all civilization to Africa, and asserted that these people were Caucasians, not Negroid. It also rejected any biblical basis despite using Hamitic as the theory's name. In other words, Ham has nothing to do with Negroes. Charles Gabriel Seligman, in some aspects of the Hamitic problem in the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan in 1913, and later works, argued that the ancient Egyptians were among this group of Caucasian Hamites, having arrived in the Nile Valley during early prehistory and introduced technology and agriculture to primitive natives they found there. There were also Caucasians. The Italian anthropologist Giuseppe Serge believed that ancient Egyptians were the Eastern African Hamitic branch of the Mediterranean race, which he called Eurafrican, According to Sergey, the Mediterranean race or Eurafrican contains three varieties or subraces: the African Hamitic branch, the Mediterranean proper branch, and the Nordic depigmented branch, all here in North Africa and Egypt. Sergey maintained in summary that the Mediterranean race, including the depigmented Nordic or white, is a brown human variety, neither white nor negroid, but pure in its elements, to say that it is not a product of the mixture of whites with negroids or negroid peoples. So in other words, it's not an admixed thing. There's just these real tan people that are down here. He went to Florida too, and he was like, what the hell's going on? He went to a beach in LA in the middle of summer, and he was like, where did all these dark Caucasians come from? Anyhow, Grafton Elliott Smith modified the theory in 1911, stating that the ancient Egyptians were dark-haired brown race, most closely linked by the closest bonds of racial affinity to the early Neolithic populations of the North African littoral and South Europe. And so if that's the truth, then we know now that that also too is Caucasians and lighter skinned. And they tried to put the Cheddar Man thing on there and cover him up about mahogany shoe polish, but wasn't that debunked within a week? It's really disgusting whenever people try to put this, we are the world, on a thing that never was that way before. Do not try to change history. If you want to change our future, you can try to change it in certain ways, but let's not ruin the Caucasian societies and trying to get people to believe false lies. It's pretty disgusting. There's certain people that are spacemen now, and they probably shouldn't be messed with. In fact, if people got behind them, imagine what could actually be done for all of humanity, as opposed to people whining and crying and doing nothing but hating the people that brought humanity. The Hamitic hypothesis was still popular in the 1960s, and in the late 1970s was supported by Anthony R. Arkell and George Peter Murdoch, but it fell out of favor. If you'll read Hamitic hypothesis in just Wiki here itself, it'll tell you that it fell out pretty much due to its ideas associated with colonial paternalism. Yeah, So again, we have the truth come out, and then people want to cover it over. There's a Taurinid race hypothesis. Egyptologist Samuel Sharp in 1846 proposed that the ancient Egyptians belonged to the Taurinid race, linking them to the Tartars. He was inspired by some ancient Egyptian paintings which depict Egyptians with sallow or yellowish skin. He said, from the color given to the women in their paintings, we learned that their skin was yellow, like that of Mongol Tatars, who had given their name to the Mongolian variety of the human race. But a single lock of hair on the young nobles reminds us also of the Tatars. And there's a connection in there with Proto-Indo-Europeans, but it doesn't really work with the Mongols. But the Mongols later took it on and adopted that type of thing. And recently I've shown you in my Proto-Indo-Europeans how the Proto-Indo-Europeans way over here have yin and yang going on and all these other type of things that you want to associate with China. And then there's pyramids over there, and then there's ancient, extremely tall, blonde-haired mummies that are over there too, and they're wearing tartan fabric too. And tartan fabric is weird because it spans all the way across into Europe and into people that wear tartan fabric today, and kilts and so on. And they wore kilts, and they wore kilts, and the Egyptians wore a kilt type thing going on. And what up with all that Caucasian crazy? Let's continue. Dynastic race theory. In early 20th century, Flinders Petrie, one of the leading Egyptologists of his day, noted that the skeletal remains found in pre-dynastic sites at Naqada in Upper Egypt showed marked differentiation, together with cultural evidence such as archaeological styles, pottery styles, cylinder steels, which are only found in ancient Sumeria, and numerous rock and tomb paintings. He deduced that the Mesopotamian force had invaded Egypt in pre-dynastic times, imposed itself on the indigenous Badarian people, then became their rulers. This came to be called the dynastic race theory. The theory further argued that the Mesopotamian founded states, or states that conquered both Upper and Lower Egypt, and founded the first dynasty of Egypt after that point. And I'm telling you that he was pretty damn right on. And there's so much evidence now that is compiling to say that it happened in before this time once, and then over again too. They had periodic floods, which are mentioned in the Bible, in Samaria. And after one of those great ones, that falcon-headed guy that they had going on, he left with a lot of his major people apparently and came over to all the way around into Egypt, drug the boats in and so on, and it's why you saw that effigy all the way through Egyptian times. I made a few videos about it. In the 1950s, the dynastic race theory was widely accepted by mainstream scholars. Scholars such as Senegalese Egyptologist Cheikh Anta Diop fought against the dynastic race theory with their own Black Egyptian theory and claimed, among other things, that European scholars supported the dynastic race theory to avoid having to admit that the ancient Egyptians were black. Yeah, it's amazing. We'll do everything for all of humanity and figure out all kinds of science, but it's all geared towards holding down the black man, as if he's not holding himself down, choking himself right now with the lies that he tries to put out. Bernal proposed that the dynastic race theory was conceived by European scholars to deny Egypt its African roots, and Caucasian North African roots, but then again, those haplogroups groups run up into there too, and the Proto-Indo-Europeans and everything that went on in all of the known world at that time was Caucasians. Contemporary scientists agree that Egyptian civilization was an indigenous Nile Valley development. And let's see the population history of Egypt. We aren't going to do that at this point, but here's some notes, and y'all can pause and look through them. I know it's extremely small. I'm not going to speak through each one of these, but some very interesting ones. And again, there were no Negroids in Egypt, and any that were not called Egyptians and never will be. But more importantly than that, all of Egypt and North Africa through the Horn were all ancient Caucasians, as it says plainly in the definition. Ethiopians, plainly in its definition, shows you where that it was all talked about by the Greeks that made up the word, and therefore that has no bearing on a people living in a place that used to be called Abyssinia, that we now call Ethiopia today. And in that same fact, we also have a very, very major point. And the major point is that West Africans had no idea that Egypt or the Bible ever existed and had no clue any of it went on, weren't involved, and in fact aren't even related to people who did know that it went on and didn't do anything for Egypt. So that's about the end of that, guys, and hopefully you've enjoyed this. Like, share, and subscribe. I don't enjoy actually destroying somebody's dogma like this, but if their dogma is fake racism, BS, and trying to discount truth and reality, especially in the videos I created, the only reason I do this is because they get on my videos and try to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, and then easily in the videos, of course, if you look down the comments, they get torn apart real quick, and then they just start calling us cavemen. It's kind of disgusting. By kind of, I mean a whole lot. And it causes racism by their own hands, and that's gotten pitiful. And it should really end. There's a point here to this. Black people have done a lot after Caucasian assistance and help, and we need to quit having to help so much, and you need to pull your own weight. Wouldn't it be great if you actually got behind the whole concept of America? Has it ever happened? Peace.